Those of the galactic community watched as humanity tore itself apart. Again. This time, it was the super wealthy families that went to war with each other as nations tore each other apart with insane abandon in the crossfire. The super wealthy fought for the same type of control as the nations always claim. One side utilizing technology hidden from the general population of humanity for at least a century. This gave them incredible advantage over the opponent at first. However, the other side grasped control of most of the resources, making the technology very limited in use. Due to this, neither side had a clear advantage, and of course, due to the massive egos of the leaders of both sides, neither would capitulate to the other, and this, of course, trickled down to the nation-states as well. This all caused massive supply issues around the world, forcing entire countries to go to war over simple, basic necessities, all of which came down to asset denial as a mentality. The mentality of, if I can't have it, no one will, and this became the thought process of the day. Even down to the smallest town, families, and small communities, they simply tried to hold together for protection of themselves and the few vital resources they had. Yet those that had never learned to live on their own would simply come in and strike. If they could not get away with the resources, they would kill those inside to take them. And if they just could not survive the assault, they would simply burn everything to the ground. As this dragged on and resources became strained beyond anyone's comprehension, the threat of going without a single meal finally reached the warring houses of the rich families, and they began to purchase peace. They began throwing money around to all sides as they arrogantly believed that anyone would just stop and become obedient slaves again with enough shiny things thrown their way. They underestimated the destruction and hate in the wake of all this conflict and all this desperate need to survive. And of course, since you can't eat currency and you can't digest gold, their power in their wealth simply vanished into the night. This is where pride, vanity, greed, and envy all came together. In a show of defiance or perhaps desperation, the wealthy families called for help from the species that they had hidden from the public for so long. The response they got was swift, as it was nothing but silence. As an act of defiance, these overfed, oversexed, overinflated egos of humans released doomsday devices claiming that if they could not succeed and take over as the masters of the world, there will not be a world left. Several areas of the world became irradiated, as others were struck with neutron munitions, ending all life all the way down through bacteria. Unstoppable plagues were released that spread out across vast areas. As this Judgment Day level event happened, all other species that knew about humanity watched and began to place bets. They placed their bets on how long until every human was lost. Bets on the fauna and flora to withstand this assault, just waiting until they could survey and then take over Earth and the entire sector. After all, it's free real estate, right? They watched as areas burned across the planet. Massive tsunamis drowned entire coastlines, not just the cities, but the entire coastline under several hundred meters of water for hours and hours and sometimes days at a time. Dead zones from certain weapons used expanded and then contracted as diseases simply ran their course. The anticipation as all the other species watched Earth was simply palpable. They were on the edge of their toes, heels, hooves, or whatever they might, as they watched their sensors read out how much of the population still remained on the planet. Populations that dropped below 5%. Then to 3, 2, Then finally one, and they all looked close to see when it was going to drop to 0, as then, by galactic law, they could move. Then they saw it jump back to 2%, and seemed to hold for that moment, then down to 1%, but it never dropped to 0. In confusion, most species believed that there was something either wrong with the sensors or there was something down there that they simply had to wait to wear off or burn out or what have you before they could do anything. So they simply stayed away, as they believed these contaminants were far too dangerous. Yet one species dared to go to Earth. The Rakagan, a very human-looking, yet a bit taller due to their lower gravity homeworld, thin by human standards, with much larger eyes and long pointed ears that seemed to move around almost independently, as though unconsciously they were trying to figure out what they were hearing. They went down in a fairly large group, all picking different areas. One picked a random area in one of the larger continents. They found a semi-mountainous terrain that seemed to be not struck by the judgment weapons. This was confusing, though they did surmise that perhaps the planet had just started to recover faster than anticipated. If the flora had recovered, it did not mean the fauna, and it did definitely not mean the humans. As the thin ship came down, they scanned for life, and the biosensors showed life had found a way to bypass all the horrors unleashed onto this world. It was incredible to see that this world was lush and green and simply teemed with all sorts of things down there. And they wanted to know what actually survived that, because anything that could survive what had just happened on Earth, that was worth study, that was worth capture, that was worth autopsy if need be. The craft landed in a field that was surrounded by green trees on all sides, standing very tall and very strong. All the trees stretched out maybe 50 to 100 meters away from the craft, and everyone was absolutely amazed that avian species seemed to take flight as they arrived. Scanning the area, they saw that larger mammalian species are moving in large numbers. Some simply asked, "How is this possible? It shouldn't be possible. This should be a dead world. How?" Once on the ground, teams began to explore, needing to take constant breaks as the higher gravity made things difficult for their long, skinny bodies. As they continued to look out, they began to find shelters, old shelters, pre-judgment shelters. They explored these to find many remains of humans scattered about, some of them simply laying in their beds, still wrapped up in a blanket, some spread out across the floor somewhere, others picked apart by scavengers as the bones were all over the yard. In some cases, it seemed as though avian species had actually gone in through the windows and picked the bones clean. With nothing they could find to see there, they continued their search. The lead researcher of this group is ordering his servants to continue their search when he sees it off to the side. Just inside the wood line, he sees something. He looks close, and he sees the silhouette of a man. A large man. That was strange. He realized this man is just standing there, looking at them. The researcher stares at this figure as it stays perfectly still, looking at him. The researcher thinks to himself, "Do my eyes deceive me?" The researcher turns to one of the servants for just a moment and then returns his gaze to the human glare. Pulling out the bioscanner, he finds it malfunctioning. He couldn't figure out what's going on. He starts beating the crap out of the system. Why won't this thing work, was all he could think. Immediately ordering his servants to search the area in front of him, they reach out and find nothing. Nothing was there. There was no sign that a human had been there. No tracks, no nothing. It's though he was seeing things. Confused, the head researcher tries to contact the ship. Communications begin malfunctioning even more. He thought to himself, what's going on? The radiation levels around here are nil. There's no neutron levels. What's going on? There's no way I should have this many malfunctions. A bit scared, he hurries back to the safety of his craft. Once inside, and he calms himself. He tells his many purchased wives about what's happening. They're confused as they have not been allowed to learn much about the planet itself. As far as they know, humans are just these short, bulky, dumb creatures. They shouldn't be able to scare an advanced species like them, of course. It doesn't make any sense. Why should they even fear them? Humans are stupid, right? The next day, the search continues for the elusive human that was standing there. They did not find it. But they do end up stumbling across a very, very large mammalian. In an attempt to capture a human for study, two of them rush in thinking that this was the human on their sensors and rush to a foraging bear, a particularly mean one that happened to have a couple of cubs around. Only 8 of the servants survive the encounter after several are simply tossed around and snapped in half. As they run away, they could see a few of their own being chewed on by the bear cubs, and of course the mother having one in her mouth, enjoying her manwich. To ensure losses like this do not happen twice, the researcher tries to contact the other ships, and finds his communications failing once again. He thinks this is weird. See, they always fail at the wrong time. These just worked. What the hell is going on? With this, the researcher thinks about leaving the area. Hell, he thinks about leaving the planet. When he finds out that another carnivorous species are attacking his servants, he decides, that's it, I'm done, and they decide to leave the planet. As the engines spin up and everybody is climbing inside, the engines begin to fail. Everyone's confused. This shouldn't happen. They try again, and the engines begin to spin up, and then again they fail. Again and again they tried, but nothing wants to work. Even their consoles are starting to flicker and just mess up. They can't figure out what's going on. Calling down to the open bay, he tells them to close the entryway, but there's no response from what's down there. Then all the alarms go off, all of them, screaming that something's going to happen, screaming that the engine is about to overload, screaming it's about to implode and then explode. The sensors read of the overload itself, so all they can do is run for the open bay and get the hell away from the ship before it explodes and kills them all. As they run out, everybody halts in their tracks, as standing all around them are humans, all standing perfectly still in a semicircle around the Rakagan that had just run out of the ship trying to save their lives. And now they're looking face to face with the prey they wanted. The Rakagan look around and are actually surprised. They look at these humans around them. They all look similarly human, but some have grown tall, very tall. Some have no hair or simply too much. One has wings protruding from her back. 2 look almost reptilian, and another in feathers. And even though many have grown very, very tall, there are a few that seem to be only about half size of what a perfectly formed human should stand, yet they themselves were perfectly formed. This was strange. The human in the center of the group that surrounded these aliens in their half circle spoke, "You are trespassing. If you wanted to visit, then it's customary to call first." This shocked everyone as he spoke in the alien language, and this should be impossible. Human vocal cords shouldn't be able to articulate the right way. The researcher tried to stop himself from shaking as he spoke. "We need to back away. This ship is about to explode." The human looked stoic as a few others began to laugh. Is it now? He said. Or could it be that you just think it is? The researcher pauses at that, turns back towards the ship, and realizes that he doesn't hear the alarms anymore. The researcher then turned and spoke again. We have come here to find out how humanity survived its own self-destruction. The man immediately retorted, Only nature herself can decide when we're flicked off this planet like a booger. If it's done by anyone else, you can see life finds a way. The man raising his arms to the side for effect. The researcher looks and is amazed at the response as he moves towards the man. In that case, you should know that this entire area, along with its resources and personnel, belong to me and my clan. You are now one of my servants. With our claim, you must bow before me and pledge fealty. The man walks forward, and this is when the researcher realizes that this human is nearly as tall as he is. This is strange. Humans usually don't get this tall. The human said, You intend to make us slaves? The researcher doubles down, hoping that his ruse will not be discovered. You have the honor and the privilege of serving one of the greatest... The man then reaches and grabs the researcher by the neck and forces him down onto his knees as the researcher reaches up to try and pull the vice of a hand away from his neck. The hand turns up so that the researcher can look up and see the man standing over him while he speaks. You really thought you could just order us into submission? You're dumber than you look, and that's saying something, pretty boy. I find it interesting that you've not figured it out. You signed your own life away the moment you landed and started taking from this planet without permission. What's worse is that we would have let you go if you have not been hell-bent on capturing one of us. And speaking of which, the only reason you're still alive is due to the fact that someone has taken a shine to you. At that moment, the largest of the humans, a male, stepped forward. That's when the man actually turned, grinned a bit, lifted the researcher up, and tossed it towards the large human. Right before he said, he thinks he got a pretty mouth. This large human grabs the researcher, picks him up as a prize, and simply walks away. The researcher was confused as he's still trying to get the air back in his lungs, and then realizes what's going on and begins screaming in fear. The man simply turns back to the other aliens still standing there, not realizing what is going on. I understand that you've all lived in servitude for most, if not all, of your lives. We offer you a choice. Choose one, to stay here as equals and live with us, or you can get on that ship and return to your nation and be nothing more than, a device for your masters? So we give you that option, and we'll give you time, but choose one. The servants are still completely confused at all this. They turn and they slowly and softly begin to talk to themselves. And as the humans simply stand there and wait, they begin to talk louder and louder with each other, starting to debate everything. That is when the servants begin to look around and seem to debate, pointing at different humans. And then they will simply walk up to a human and ask if they could be their partner. A couple of former servants asked to stay but be with each other. They wanted to actually have a family, but they wanted to keep their own bloodline. With everyone choosing to stay and actually choosing different partners, the man simply looked and said, "This has been well bargained and done." It was later towards the evening, around a large fire, that the former wives asked the men in charge exactly how did the humans survive all that. As the man tried to swallow his food and got ready to answer, he could hear pained screams from the former slave-owning researcher echoing in the background. He tried not to laugh and spit out his food as that would be rude, and the human man began to explain. He explained how they did have enough nuclear ordnance to basically turn the planet into a molten ball of rock, but most of the controllers of the nukes weren't stupid enough to fire everything, not to mention most of it's in storage. Only cities, most of which were already abandoned, were melted into glass from multiple nuke hits. That neutron ordnance used was not enough to cover the rest of the world and just clean it of life, not even close. Even though it did work, the area of effect was not anywhere near what anybody expected. Especially since, as it turned out, many things since the neutron bomb's development had been brought up that kind of distorted it. Power cables, electronics that were already activated, scrambled the force. This meant that the neutron ordnance wasn't always lethal. In fact, it was only about 80% lethal to everything. Along with that, anyone who happened to be underground, even within their own basement, was not affected. At least, not in the way you'd expect. The release of the weaponized plagues are not as effective as anyone thinks. All those different biological and chemicals dissipate way too fast to infect everybody. In fact, the tsunami weapons were the most effective out of everyone. As it flooded out most of the underground areas near the shorelines, it didn't matter if anybody was in their basement, in their bunker, or what have you. If you're underwater for several hours or several days, you're gonna run out of air. However, this was just the shoreline, only a couple dozen miles away, and you're gonna be fine. You're gonna be able to survive it, provided you don't get caught up in all the debris. The kicker is, that's not that many people. There are plenty of people farther inland that were not affected by anyone. However, what no one expected was the fallout. The fallout of mixing of infections, integrating with each other, not just destroying each other, but mixing, hit with radiation that mutated them also, along with multiple different types of radiation coming in. And then it got in the water, and the resulting mutations, well, at first it killed a lot more off. Sometimes you grow 3 hearts, sometimes literally your colon becomes your brain. It was gross. It was disgusting, and many people died in horrible, horrible ways. But the resulting mutations that survived, well, just look around you, he said. The wives looked around as they sipped on their meal as well. They realized what he was saying was true. I mean, the evidence was right in front of them. One of them turns and says, "That leaves just one more question." "Yes, what is it?" "That was 69 human years ago. How are you still alive from that and still so young looking? This is a young human, right?" "Oh, it's a genetic trait that's been suppressed for centuries. All of us here no longer are held back by the passage of time. We all regenerate. It's just part of us. I mean, back in the day, humans used to live for, a millennia or better? I mean, if there's a time limit, we don't know about it. And now, we got plenty of time to work on things. We have plenty of time to rediscover agriculture. We have plenty of time to learn everything there is. And we can work on different things that we have new abilities for, like my telepathy. And, that allows us to speak with each other right now. You know this." One of the females turns and said, "So, if that's the case, you're always going to look this way?" The man looks confused. "Is that an issue?" The other wife spoke. "Only when another comes to take our place at your side." The man chuckled a little bit, and he looked around to everybody, starting to get handsy with their new partners, realizing that things are going to be very active later. He then said, "I don't believe that's going to be a concern." He then closed his eyes and he thinks out, stretching his mind out across the world to all the others that coordinated the involvement and stopping this invasion. He can see all over the planet as each group is enjoying themselves as the trick of making the new elven partners leave their ship worked perfectly in every single situation. All the other telepaths smiled with him, and they subconsciously all raised their drinks. He did the same, even though he kept his eyes shut. Coming back to himself, he realized his arm was up and the girls were confused. He lowered it back down and said, "We might have to worry about another species trying to take the planet, but that's going to be later." The other female elf that was close to him said, "Then there's only one question we need to answer tonight." She then straddles over his leg and says, "Can you endure?" With slight hesitation, he reaches over with his free arm and pulls the other one closer before saying, "From one of you or both?" Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you so much for joining me today on this short story. Before I go, I wanted to actually test everybody's sci-fi knowledge because that final joke, I was wondering if anybody knew where that came from. If you know, feel free to put it in the comments section. I also need to send out some special thank yous to a few of my supporters, and those would be Erica Gem, MTF Guard, Guardian Sage, Douglas Scarborough, SS Demon, Brian Kemp, and Prozac and Pancakes. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I'll see you on the next one. This is Syntax, punching out.